Have you ever noticed something strange about people? When you're constantly there, texting, calling, explaining, trying, they barely seem to notice. But the moment you go quiet, the moment you stop chasing, something shifts. Suddenly they start wondering where you went. Suddenly, your silence becomes louder than all the words you used to say. That's because silence has power. Not the kind of silence that hides pain, but the kind that protects your dignity. And when you learn to use that silence, you stop trying to convince someone to value you, and you start showing them what life feels like without you. There comes a moment in every relationship when you realize that effort alone cannot create respect. You can explain your feelings, send long messages, try to fix misunderstandings, and even sacrifice your own peace just to keep someone close. But if the other person isn't truly paying attention, all that effort becomes background noise. The more you speak, the less they hear, and that's where silence becomes powerful. Silence isn't weakness. It isn't avoidance. It's awareness. It's awareness. It's the moment you stop over-explaining yourself and start observing instead. When you step back and stop filling every gap with your effort, you allow reality to reveal itself. You allow the other person to feel the absence of your presence. The texts stop, the reminders stop, the emotional labor stops. And suddenly, the connection they took for granted is no longer automatic. What happens next tells you everything you need to know. Some people will notice immediately. They'll feel the difference. They'll reach out, wondering why things changed, not because you manipulated them, but because your silence created space for them to reflect. For the first time, they have to move toward you instead of expecting you to move toward them. Others may not react at all, and that silence, painful as it might feel, is also a powerful answer. Because when someone truly values you, your absence doesn't go unnoticed. They feel it. They question it. They try to reconnect. Silence reveals the truth that effort sometimes hides. But the real transformation isn't what happens to them. It's what happens to you. When you stop talking just to be heard and start protecting your peace instead, your mindset changes. You stop trying to prove your value. You stop chasing approval. You stop overthinking every message and every moment. Instead, you begin focusing on your own life, your own goals, your own happiness. And that shift in energy is something people can feel. Confidence is quiet. Self-respect is quiet. Boundaries are quiet. You don't need to announce them. You simply live them. And when someone sees that you are no longer trying to hold them in your life, they begin to understand that your presence was a privilege, not a guarantee. Silence forces people to confront something they may never have noticed before, what it feels like when you're no longer trying. So if you ever feel like your words are being ignored, remember this. Sometimes the most powerful message you can send is the one you never say. Because silence doesn't just make others notice you, it reminds you of your own worth. There is a powerful shift that happens the moment you stop filling every space with your words, your explanations, and your effort. For a long time, you might have believed that if you just communicated more, explained your feelings better, or tried harder to make someone understand you, things would improve. You thought your persistence would make the other person see your value. But when someone becomes used to constant access to you, your messages, your attention, your emotional support, they stop noticing it. It becomes normal. It becomes expected. Your presence, no matter how meaningful it is, fades into the background of their life because they know it will always be there. When you suddenly become quiet, that pattern breaks. The constant flow of your attention disappears, and the silence that replaces it creates something people rarely experience anymore: awareness. Without your effort filling the space, they begin to feel the difference. The messages that once arrived every day are no longer there. The person who always reached out, checked in, or tried to keep the connection alive is suddenly not doing it anymore. That absence can feel surprising, even unsettling. People start noticing the quiet in ways they never noticed the noise. Silence forces people to pay attention because it removes the comfort they had become used to. When someone knows they don't have to do anything to keep you around, they stop being conscious of your presence. But when your energy disappears, their mind begins to question what changed. They start replaying moments in their head. They wonder why the usual communication stopped. They may check their phone more often. They may think about conversations you once had. Your silence interrupts their routine, and in doing so, it pushes them to become aware of the role you played in their life. This awareness is powerful because it doesn't come from pressure or arguments. It comes from space. When you are constantly talking, explaining, or trying to fix things, the other person can ignore it or brush it aside, but silence cannot be argued with. Silence creates room for reflection. It gives the other person time to sit with their own thoughts instead of reacting to yours. In that quiet space, they begin to see things more clearly. They may realize how much effort you are putting in. They may begin to understand the emotional support you provided. They may start to see that the connection required more from you than it ever required from them. At the same time, silence also creates awareness within you. When you stop speaking out of frustration or fear of losing someone, you begin observing instead of reacting. You notice patterns that were hidden before. You see how often you were the one initiating contact, how often you were the one trying to solve problems, how often you were the one trying to keep the relationship alive. The silence becomes a mirror, showing you the dynamic that existed all along. In that awareness, something important begins to change. Instead of trying to control the situation with more effort or more words, you begin to step back and watch what happens naturally. You allow the other person the opportunity to notice your absence without forcing them to respond. And that quiet shift often reveals more truth than any conversation ever could. When you stop speaking, stop explaining, stop reaching out first, and stop chasing clarity from someone who never gave it, something honest finally begins to surface. Silence removes the noise, yours and theirs. It removes the excuses, the justifications, the maybe they're busy, the maybe they didn't mean it, and every story you use to tell yourself to fill the empty spaces their behavior created. Silence is not passive, it's revealing. It allows you to observe the natural flow of someone's intentions without pushing, prompting, or guiding them. When you stop putting effort into keeping the connection alive, you finally see whether they have any intention of keeping it alive themselves. If someone cares about you, they will not let silence last. They will feel the shift in your energy because it was your energy that filled the relationship before. When you step back, they notice the imbalance for the first time. They start wondering why you pulled away. They ask themselves whether they did something wrong. They reconsider the things they didn't take seriously. They start replaying moments they glossed over. Silence gives them the space they never had to reflect, because you were always the one doing the emotional work for both of you. If they reach out even in small ways, it's a sign that your presence mattered more than they showed. It might not always be dramatic. Sometimes it's a simple, hey, haven't heard from you, or are you okay? Sometimes it's checking your social media more, liking posts they used to ignore, or suddenly becoming more attentive in conversation. People rarely say outright, your silence scared me, but their behavior will show it. The ones who care will step forward because they feel the discomfort of losing access to you. But if they remain silent, that speaks even louder. Silence in return is not confusion. It is clarity, it is the truth without sugarcoating. Someone who does not care about your distance is someone who did not truly appreciate your presence. This doesn't mean they are bad. It simply means they were not emotionally invested in the same way. And while that truth can be painful, it is also freeing, because silence reveals what you were too hopeful or too afraid to accept. You cannot build a connection with someone who doesn't feel the need to maintain it. Silence protects you from staying in situations where your effort is the only glue. It prevents you from wasting months or years chasing a person who never intended to meet you halfway. It keeps you from pouring love into someone who doesn't have the capacity or willingness to pour it back. And once you see their true intentions, whether they step forward or stay distant, you can act from a place of clarity instead of confusion. Silence also reveals how someone handles discomfort. People who value you don't sit comfortably in the quiet. They don't let the connection fade without trying. They don't ignore the shift and go about their lives unaffected. They reach out because your presence mattered. And the ones who don't reach out give you the blessing of truth. Truth that saves you from continuing to invest in someone who was never choosing you in the first place. In this way, silence becomes the filter that separates people who care from people who were merely entertained by your effort. It becomes the moment where truth rises to the surface, not because you demanded it, but because you allowed space for it to appear on its own. When you choose silence instead of constantly explaining yourself, something important begins to rebuild inside you, your self-respect. For a long time, when you are caught in a cycle of trying to be understood, you may not realize how much of your dignity you are slowly giving away. You keep repeating your feelings, hoping the other person will finally listen. You keep trying to fix misunderstandings, clarify your intentions, or prove that what you feel is real. But every time you have to fight that hard just to be heard, a small part of your self-worth begins to wear down. It starts to feel like your emotions need approval before they can be valid. Silence changes that dynamic completely. When you stop chasing conversations that go nowhere, you send a powerful message, not just to the other person, but to yourself. You are saying that your feelings are not up for negotiation. You are saying that you no longer need to argue for your own value. Instead of begging someone to recognize what you bring to their life, you allow your absence to speak for itself. That decision immediately restores a sense of dignity that may have been lost during all the effort and emotional exhaustion. Self-respect grows the moment you stop reacting to every situation. Before choosing silence, it is easy to fall into the habit of responding instantly to every confusing message, every delay, every mixed signal. Your mind becomes busy trying to interpret what someone meant, why they behaved a certain way, or how you should respond to keep things from falling apart. This constant reaction creates stress and anxiety. You feel like you must manage every moment of the connection just to prevent it from breaking. When you become silent, that pressure begins to disappear. You are no longer trying to control how someone sees you or how the relationship unfolds. Instead, you start focusing on maintaining your inner peace. Silence gives you the chance to pause, appease, grieve, and think before you react. It reminds you that not every situation requires your immediate emotional energy. Sometimes the strongest response is simply stepping back and allowing things to reveal themselves. This quiet confidence is something people can sense even without words. When someone sees that you are no longer chasing their attention or trying to win their approval, the dynamic shifts. Your calmness shows that you respect yourself enough not to participate in behavior that makes you feel small. You are no longer trying to force someone to treat you better. You are simply choosing not to remain in situations where you are not valued. At the same time, silence allows you to reconnect with your own priorities. When you are no longer caught in constant emotional conversations, you regain time and energy for your own life. Your focus moves away from worrying about someone else's responses and returns to your personal goals, your friendships, your growth, and your happiness. This shift strengthens your sense of independence and reminds you that your life does not revolve around someone else's attention. In this space, self-respect becomes natural. You begin to recognize that healthy connections do not require you to sacrifice your dignity. The right people will understand you without endless explanations, and they will respect your feelings without needing to be convinced. Silence becomes the boundary that protects your peace and the quiet strength that reminds you of your true worth. When you choose silence instead of constant effort, something subtle but powerful begins to shift in the dynamic between you and the other person. For a long time, the connection may have revolved around your actions. You were the one starting conversations, checking in, fixing misunderstandings, and making sure the relationship kept moving forward. Without realizing it, you carried most of the emotional responsibility. The other person simply responded when they felt like it, knowing the connection would continue because you were always there to keep it alive. Silence interrupts that pattern completely. The moment you stop filling the space with your attention, the responsibility for the connection no longer sits entirely with you. It naturally moves toward them. For the first time, they must decide whether they want to reach out, start a conversation, or put effort into maintaining the relationship. Instead of you moving toward them again and again, the direction of movement has the opportunity to reverse. This shift in power is not about control or manipulation. It is about balance. Healthy relationships are built on shared effort, not one person constantly chasing while the other passively receives attention. When silence enters the dynamic, the imbalance becomes visible. If the other person truly values the connection, they begin to feel the gap left by your absence. They realize that conversations do not happen automatically anymore. They recognize that emotional support, interest, and presence are no longer being offered freely without their participation. That realization often encourages them to step forward. They might begin initiating conversations more often. They might check in to see how you are doing. They may start paying closer attention to the connection because they no longer assume it will always be maintained by your effort alone. The dynamic shifts from a one-sided pursuit into something that requires contribution from both sides, but silence also creates another important outcome. If the other person does not step forward, the imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. When you stop doing all the work, the connection may grow quiet very quickly. This can feel painful at first, but it also reveals something essential. The relationship was being sustained almost entirely by your energy. Without your constant effort, there was little left to hold it together. Recognizing this truth is an important step toward emotional clarity. Instead of continuing to exhaust yourself trying to make something work, you gain a clearer understanding of the dynamic that existed all along. Silence removes the illusion that effort alone can create mutual care. It shows you whether the other person is willing to participate in building the connection, or whether they were simply comfortable receiving attention without giving much in return. At the same time, your own mindset begins to change. When you stop chasing someone's attention, you begin valuing your own time and energy differently. You realize that relationships should not require constant pursuit to survive. They should grow naturally through shared interest, communication, and respect. Silence helps you step out of the role of the pursuer and into a position where both people have the opportunity to contribute equally to the connection. When you choose silence instead of constantly reaching out, arguing, or trying to fix everything, you create something that may not have existed before: space. For a long time, your energy may have been completely tied to the other person. Your thoughts revolved around their messages, their reactions, their moods, and the small signs that made you wonder where the relationship was going. Every moment of uncertainty pushed you to respond with more effort, more explanations, more attention, something that felt confusing. That constant focus on them slowly pulled your attention away from your own life. Silence changes that. The moment you step back, you free up the mental and emotional energy that was being used to maintain the connection instead of constantly checking your phone or replaying conversations in your mind. You start noticing how much time and focus you suddenly have. The space that once felt filled with worry becomes open again. In that space, your priorities begin to shift. You start paying more attention to your own life. You reconnect with activities that once made you feel alive, but may have been pushed aside while you were trying to keep someone close. You spend more time focusing on your goals, your work, your health, and the relationships that naturally bring positivity into your life. Your energy begins to return to you instead of being constantly directed toward someone who may not have been giving the same effort back. This shift in focus also strengthens your sense of independence. When you are no longer emotionally dependent on someone's responses, your mood becomes more stable. You are not waiting for a message to determine how your day will feel. You are not measuring your worth by how quickly someone replies or how much attention they give you. Instead, you begin building a sense of confidence that comes from within. Your happiness becomes less connected to external validation and more connected to the life you are actively creating for yourself. Silence also allows you to see the bigger picture of what you truly want in a relationship. When you are caught in the middle of constant communication and emotional tension, it is difficult to think clearly about your needs. You may focus only on keeping the connection alive, rather than questioning whether the connection is actually healthy. But when silence creates distance, your perspective widens. You begin asking yourself important questions about the kind of relationship you want, the type of effort you deserve, and whether the dynamic you were in truly aligned with your values. At the same time, this renewed focus on yourself often changes the way others see you. When you are no longer chasing attention or trying to prove your value, your energy becomes calmer and more confident. People tend to notice individuals who are comfortable in their own lives and who do not depend on others to feel complete. Your silence reflects that independence. It shows that your time and attention are meaningful and that they are given intentionally rather than out of fear of losing someone. As your focus continues to return to your own growth and well-being, you begin building a stronger connection with yourself. You understand your emotions more clearly, you recognize your boundaries more easily, and you become more selective about the relationships you allow into your life. Silence becomes less about distancing yourself from someone else and more about strengthening the relationship you have with your own life. In the end, silence isn't about punishing someone or playing games. It's about respecting yourself enough to stop forcing a connection that should flow naturally. When you step back, you allow the truth to reveal itself, and you remind yourself that the right people will notice your absence and value your presence. Thank you for taking the time to listen and reflect today. I truly appreciate you being here, and I hope this message helps you move forward with confidence, clarity, and self-respect.